Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new UMA AV-8B Harrier 2 Plus. This is a beautiful looking kit and highly anticipated. So let's see how I get on. So then we're going to start this build off in the cockpit. It follows a pretty standard way of approaching cockpits in this modern day of modelling. It breaks everything up quite nicely into the sidewalls and floor aspects, but definitely doesn't overcomplicate it, which is a nice touch. It's good to note, similar to Edouard, they supply two forms of the sidewalls in the kit, one with the raised detail already moulded in, and these flat, bare basic ones which can also be fitted. And the reason behind this is because 3D decals are included in the kit, so of course it's better to have all the detail raised before you put them on. I personally think the level of detail throughout this kit is absolutely superb. That being said, UMA have come out and said that there is going to be a lot of 3D resin extras and upgrades to help elevate it to that absolutely ludicrous level of detail. The general construction of the cockpit was short but sweet. As I mentioned earlier, they've done a great job of not over-engineering this portion of the build. As none of us have worked with this plastic before, I thought it was a good idea to give you a small overview of what it's like. It reminds me an awful lot of Meng's plastic. It's relatively soft but captures details nice and sharply. Overall, very happy. My attention can now be moved to building up the wheel well. I can now spend some time building up each of the sidewalls, which will be brought together in just a moment. And here we go. Bringing the sidewalls together is a relatively easy task as everything fits flawlessly. And that concludes construction of the front nose landing gear bay and also the cockpit. Everything can now be primed and coated in Mr. Finishing Surfaces 1500 black as a base. This unifies the surface and gets it ready for paint. Speaking of paint, we're going to first be using Mr. Colours C307, which is a grey utilised within the cockpit. If you've watched the channel before, you know I like to black base my colours within the cockpit. This means I'm going to be directing heavy paint flow around certain aspects of the cockpit and then blending it over to create tonal variation and make certain aspects pop out more than others. Now turning my attention to the nose wheel well, I'm going to load some white into the airbrush, and instead of black basing, I'm just going to dust it into the region as this gives natural shading, and once a wash is applied on top, it looks absolutely great. My airbrush can now be put to one side and I can focus my attention on some detail painting. Here on screen you can see me picking out a couple of the switches on the joystick, and this is being done using a very finely tipped brush and also Amomig's Atom paint range. Now with the basic details all painted, I can utilise the included Lambo 3D cockpit set. I must say it is absolutely awesome to have this included in the kit, and I will never say no to some 3D decals. On that note, the decals themselves are absolutely beautifully moulded, up there with the quality of the very best in the industry. I made sure to use some ultra glue to secure them to the model. Here was the final result. After the decals were secured, I gave the entire cockpit a generous coating of GX100 gloss varnish. Once that was cured, I could use a Black Knight panel line wash to help emphasise and pick out all those beautiful details throughout the cockpit. And here was the result. I also did this on the underside in the wheel well. Once the wash had dried off, I gave everything a coating of VMS's satin varnish. This then gave me a great base to do some dry brushing. I focused mainly on some of the darker areas of the cockpit, for example the sides of the ejection seats as you can see on screen now, and also the anti-glare shield at the front. Once all of the aspects had been dry brushed, I could then start to bring everything together. The ejection seat slots into position and it is beautifully moulded. After this, it can be pushed into one side of the front portion of the fuselage. There's some nice large locating lugs ensuring a proper and secure fitment, and you're not going to get this in the wrong position, I can assure you. Once that was seated correctly, I could bring the other half of the fuselage and sandwich the cockpit in between. After this, there's one or two more pieces which have to be secured into the nose wheel well. I can now start to get a couple of the sub-assemblies ready which are going to be used in the build-up of the fuselage. Firstly, the main wheel well can be cemented into position, followed by the air brake, and then finally the front belly piece. Once all of the sub-assemblies are in position, they can be sandwiched in between using the other side of the fuselage. This has a nice big locating lug as you can see, which makes fitment an absolute breeze. A few panels now need to be fitted to patch up a couple of the holes which are around the fuselage. Now, as I was going around, I did unfortunately notice that C6 on the sprue was missing, but this was no worry at all as I measured the UMA team and they sent out a part immediately, which is great customer service. As I continue making my way around, you'll see that there are a lot of lumps and bumps like these chaff and flare dispensers on top. I recommend not cementing these in place until you've sorted out that small seam line which sits on top. As these are very lumpy and bumpy, it makes it very hard to get a sanding sponge or stick in position. Now turning some attention towards the exhaust area of the model, a lot of these parts were secured on using ultra glue. And my reasoning for this is I didn't want the exhaust nozzles to be cemented into position at this stage as I wanted to paint them separately. So having these pieces removable meant that I could paint them separately and then put them on later on in the build, removing any fitment issues. Anyway, moving on to having a look at the wings. They are made up of two pieces which sandwich together and can then be slotted onto the fuselage half, which snaps into position. I now turned my attention back to the cockpit to put on the final few pieces before it can be joined with the rest of the build. This includes the instrument panel, which was built up and detailed using the 3D decals included. The only extra bit I personally added was a little bit of holographic film on the underside of one of the transparencies to help give that holographic HUD projection effect. Now then, once the anti-glare shield was secure and in position, I can take it one step further by adding the included photo etch heads-up display. I made sure to use some tweezers and some ultra glue to get it in the correct position and keep it secure. Once it was in the correct position, and as you can see this did take a little bit of fiddling around, I can use the included super thin plastic film sheets to create that multi-layered effect. I think it is absolutely phenomenal the level of detail in this heads-up display, and straight out of the box, it is superb. Now then, from one positive onto another, here is the single moulded intake cowling. I know, it is superb the level of detail they've managed to get onto this single moulded piece. It is taken one step further by putting the intake fan itself into the back. It can then be masked off using the included masks which come in the kit. After this, it is joined with the forward section of the fuselage, and then from that, this assembly can be cemented onto the main fuselage. Although it definitely looks like a Harrier now, we're going to keep on pushing on. Firstly, putting the nose cone into position, and then looking to build up the gun pod. After both sides of the pods have been built up, it can be cemented onto the underside of the fuselage. Continue on by putting a few more panels into position, followed by the wheel well pods on the sides of the wing. Do note when all of these clips are playing how well everything is fitting. It almost looks like a Lego kit. Very impressive from a first model. Both sides of the wings can have their ailerons fitted, and I'm also leaving the flaps off just because I felt they obstructed quite a lot of the fuselage and I didn't want it to get in the way of painting. Having a look at the vertical stabilizer, it has quite a simple build-up. With the rudder sitting in between the two halves, it retains its movable nature. It can then be pressure fitted into the corresponding slot. Now time to button up that front end. So initially the plastic moulded framework for the main canopy can get glued into position using a small amount of ultra glue. Then the main front canopy is glued into position as well, and then masked off using the included masking set. A pod goes then in front of this to finish off the main build. After doing a thorough check over the airframe to find any seams which might be around, I was confident that this plane was ready for some primer. I'm going to be using Mr. Finishing Surfaces 1500 Black for this purpose. It highlighted to me any imperfections which were then sorted out, and then, before I knew it, I could move on to actually painting this model. UMA provides 3 unique and equally awesome schemes within the kit. However, unfortunately I could only choose one. I ended up opting for the low-vis Black Sheep livery. It looks absolutely awesome. To start off this painting, I'm going to initially use Mr. Colors C317 on the underside. I've made sure to thin my paint to quite a high ratio as I'm going to be black basing this paint onto the surface. The reason for this is, as you can see on screen, the rivet detail and the overall surface detail on this model is superb, and I personally find that black basing gives me the best template and base to make sure I highlight all of it to the best of my ability. Once I've gone around the underside highlighting the inners of each panel, I can start blending everything together. This is done in short and very light coats to make sure I don't drown out the effect and keep it exactly how I want it. Once I'm happy that everything has been blended in, I add 1 or 2 drops of Mr. Color C1 White into the mixture. This lightened paint can then be used very sparingly across the outers of a few of the panels and also along a few of the rivet lines. What this does is start to break up the paint even more and help me accentuate a few of the rivet lines and just start to really make this aircraft look like it has been battered at sea. I found quick, sharp and erratic movements are best for helping create this modulated and marbled look. After I was happy with the underside and how much I'd faded it out, I can repeat the process on the top, but this time using Mr. Colors C305. When doing all of this fine paintwork, it is important to have a brush which you are comfortable with. For me, and many others, it is the Mr. Hobby Pro Convoy. If you're interested in adding one of these to your arsenal, we have recently had a few come in stock down at Hannett's London. Located next to the RAF Hendon Museum, it is a one-stop shop for all of your modelling needs. So if you're in the area, make sure to pop in and get yourself a summer project. As I hope you've seen, I've repeated the exact process and now doing the final touches of the highlights around some of the regions. It gives a very convincing and weather-beaten effect. Whilst I had the airbrush out and was in that painting mindset sort of flow, I thought it was a good opportunity to airbrush on the exhaust stains. All I'm using here is a highly diluted Mr. Colors C2 black and very gently misting on from a distance the general shape of the exhaust. Once I've got the shape outlined, I can go in and start to concentrate more along any of the rivet or panel lines. Any of the other tonal variation, I thought it was a good idea to leave until the weathering process. Once this was done and I was happy with how it was looking, that concluded the painting process of the Harrier. Now hopefully here you can see why I only temporarily glued this part in position. After removing it, I can secure the nozzle into position. The nozzle was painted up using a slightly different tone of the underside colour and spun chipped with some dark iron colouring. Once I was happy with its positioning, I could re-secure that shroud. Now moving on to the rear exhaust, they're a little bit different. Initially the blast shields go in on either side and then the rear exhaust nozzle can be put into position. You'll notice that the rear ones I have painted more as this anodized looking crazy metallic colour, and the reason is, after looking at some reference images, is the rear nozzles were much hotter than the forward nozzles. Because of this, the paint came off of them so much quicker and I've tried to replicate that in the model. Now I thought it was time to secure that paintwork in place. A coating of GX100 was used to give a nice gloss varnish and a base for the decals. The decals are printed by Cartograph and boy oh boy are they good. Within 5 minutes they were already conforming into all of the details. Naturally though, I left them overnight to cure before resealing them in with another layer of gloss varnish. After looking at more references, the Harriers weren't too dirty. They were definitely a bit grubby and beaten up, but not dirty. So a simple panel wash was a good place to start. I'm using the Black Knight one by Ammo MIG. It was applied along all of the rivet lines and panel lines, left to dry and then very gently rubbed off using a paper towel. Moving on to tackling the exhaust stains, I wanted to add a little bit of colour into it. So I'm going to be using a mud brown oil brusher and streaking it along the extremities of the exhaust stain which I previously had airbrushed on. I will then be able to blend it in and hopefully give a far more authentic and a little bit more tonal variation into this exhaust stain rather than just a big black streak. After a little bit more oil weathering on the top surfaces using a black oil brusher, everything was sealed in using VMS's satin varnish. After this, I can press on with the final assemblies, initially putting all of the pylons into their position. flaps can also be put into position at this stage. Now flipping the Harrier over, I can cement in the nose landing gear. It is really nicely detailed but is also structurally sound. To help with this structural soundness, I'm going to be securing it using superglue. Moving my attention more towards the rear of the Harrier, the air brake can be cemented into position. The wheels themselves can be pressed onto the main landing gear legs and making sure they are oriented correctly as there are flat spots moulded into them. Now the only bit of ordnance can be pushed onto the model, and that was just going to be 2 drop tanks. And that isn't to say that the ordnance included in the kit is poor quality, it's actually top class. I just wanted to keep this one plain and simple. The correct glazing can be cemented onto the plastic framing for the canopy, and you should be able to put a 3D decal of the ejection cord on there as well, but due to my heavy-handed nature, I unfortunately broke it, so I thought I'd leave that one off. The refueling probe can be pushed into position, along with 2 or 3 bits of metal details. And that about finishes this one up. I am absolutely blown away with the quality of this kit. It is superb in every aspect, and once it becomes available, I highly recommend grabbing one. It is a do before you die kit, and I can say that with confidence. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I really do hope that you've enjoyed. Let me know what you thought down below and any questions you might have. But without any further ado, enjoy the final photos and videos, and I'll see you next time, guys. Bye bye.
Holy shit, he's fucking low. Oh, damn.